The Lioness program didn't break overnight, it cracked slowly, and Season 3 is where it finally bleeds. Lioness Season 3 isn't arriving loudly. There's no flashy announcement, no full trailer screaming for attention, no confident release date stamped in bold. And that silence? That's the loudest warning sign of all. Because when a show like Lioness goes quiet, it's usually because something ugly is coming, something uncomfortable, something that doesn't need explosions to feel dangerous. Season 3 doesn't feel like a continuation. It feels like a confrontation. And Jo, she's standing right in the middle of it, already exhausted, already questioning, already one bad decision away from crossing a line she can't uncross. The trailer breakdown hints at a version of Jo we've been watching slowly form since Season 1, but now she's done hiding it. Season 2 stripped away her illusions. Season 3 looks ready to strip away her obedience. The Lioness program was always sold as necessary, brutal but meaningful, morally gray but effective. But what happens when the person who knows the system best realizes that it isn't gray at all, that it's calculated, disposable, and designed to move forward no matter who it leaves behind? That realization changes everything, and Jo can't unsee it anymore. What's unsettling is that Season 3 doesn't position Jo as a rebel right away. She's not storming offices or tearing the system down on day one. She's doing something far more dangerous. She's watching, listening, staying quiet. The trailer update suggests she's still inside the machine, but her loyalty isn't automatic anymore. Orders don't land the same way. Briefings feel rehearsed, promises feel hollow. And when someone like Jo starts questioning motives instead of missions, the real damage begins. Because she isn't impulsive, she's strategic. And if she's still playing along, it's not because she believes, it's because she's counting. Season 3 feels like it's built around consequences instead of action. Not what goes wrong in the field, but what follows people home. The weight Jo carries from the cartel deal, the Middle East operation that technically succeeded but morally collapsed. The way the system absorbed the wins and discarded the trauma, none of that disappeared. It piled up, and now it's pressing down on her from every angle. The trailer doesn't need to show blood or gunfire to make that clear. Jo's posture says enough. This is someone who has reached the edge of believing her sacrifices matter. There's also a noticeable shift in power, and it's subtle enough to be terrifying. Jo's authority isn't taken from her outright, it's eroded. Conversations happen without her. Decisions are made before she's informed. Information arrives late or not at all. That's not an accident. That's how systems neutralize people who think too much. And Jo feels it. The woman who once held everything together is being quietly pushed out of the center. And the worst part? The people doing it believe they're in control. They think Jo will adapt. They think she'll fall in line, but they're forgetting one thing. Jo knows exactly how fragile this whole structure really is. Season 3 doesn't frame Jo as a hero or a villain. It frames her as someone waking up. And waking up inside a system that depends on silence is dangerous. Her questions are no longer internal, her hesitation is visible, and the tension doesn't come from whether she can complete a mission. It comes from whether she still wants to. That's a terrifying place for someone like Jo to stand. Because once belief is gone, skill becomes a weapon instead of a tool. And here's the part that should worry everyone watching closely. Jo isn't being reckless. She isn't emotional in a way the system can dismiss. She's calm, controlled, observant. The trailer breakdown suggests she's letting things play out, not because she agrees, but because she wants to see how bad it can get, how far they'll go, who they'll sacrifice next. And when someone with her experience starts collecting evidence instead of excuses, the countdown has already started. So the real question heading into Lioness Season 3 isn't whether Jo will break. It's whether the system realizes what it's created before she decides to stop protecting it. Or will they only understand once she finally turns the machine against itself? What makes Lioness Season 3 feel so unsettling isn't just Jo's growing resistance. It's how quietly the system responds to it. There's no dramatic confrontation yet, no open rebellion. Instead, there's a slow tightening of the leash. The trailer breakdown and early updates suggest a season where pressure replaces punishment, where Jo isn't removed but repositioned. And that's far more dangerous. Because when a system doesn't fire you, doesn't demote you, doesn't publicly discipline you, it's usually trying to figure out how much of a liability you've become. Jo isn't being pushed out, she's being watched. Season 3 seems determined to explore what happens when someone who understands the cost of every decision is deliberately excluded from making them. Jo has always been the buffer between command and reality, the person translating cold strategy into something survivable. Remove that buffer, and things don't just get messy, they get cruel. And Jo sees it happening in real time. Orders feel cleaner on paper, outcomes look acceptable in reports, but the human damage is worse than ever, and the people signing off on it don't have to look anyone in the eye afterward. Jo does. There's a deep sense that Season 3 is about erosion, not just of trust, but of identity. Jo's role within the Lioness program is no longer clearly defined. She's still useful, still skilled, still respected on the surface. But underneath that, there's doubt. Doubt about her reliability, doubt about her loyalty, doubt about whether she's still controllable, and systems don't tolerate doubt for long. Especially when it comes from someone who knows where the pressure points are. Jo helped build this structure. She understands its weaknesses, and that makes her far more threatening than any external enemy. The updates hint that Jo is being forced into a reactive position for the first time. Instead of shaping missions, she's cleaning up after them. Instead of setting boundaries, she's responding to decisions she never agreed with. That loss of agency isn't just frustrating, it's humiliating. And humiliation is often the final step before someone stops caring about consequences. Jo isn't lashing out yet, but the anger is there, simmering under restraint. She's watching lives get rearranged, sacrificed, erased, all in the name of efficiency. And the worst part? The system calls it progress. Season 3 also seems ready to blur the line between leadership and expendability. Jo has always believed that if she stayed strong enough, smart enough, disciplined enough, she could protect the people under her command. But what happens when she realizes that the system never intended for those people to be protected in the first place? That the Lioness operatives aren't assets to preserve, but tools to use until they break? That realization hits hard because Jo sees herself in them. Every recruit feels like a mirror, every loss feels personal. And that emotional closeness, the thing that once made her an effective leader, is now being treated as a flaw. The tension in Season 3 doesn't come from big action beats. It comes from moments where Jo has to choose between obedience and conscience. Do you follow an order you know will destroy someone who trusted you? Do you stay silent because speaking up would put a target on your back? Or do you accept that staying quiet makes you complicit in something you no longer believe in? These aren't cinematic choices, they're quiet ones. And they wear a person down faster than any battlefield ever could. Jo isn't collapsing under pressure, she's hollowing out. There's also a growing sense that Jo's presence is making others uncomfortable. Not because she's unpredictable, but because she's too aware. Her questions linger, her pauses are noticed. Her refusal to accept easy answers disrupts the narrative everyone else relies on to sleep at night. And that's dangerous, because systems survive on stories. Stories about necessity, about sacrifice, about the greater good. Jo is starting to see through those stories, and once you do, you can't pretend anymore. Every briefing feels staged. Every justification feels recycled. Every promise that this time will be different sounds like a lie she's heard too many times before. Season 3 feels like it's pushing Jo toward isolation. Allies become cautious. Conversations become measured. Trust evaporates quietly. She's no longer surrounded by people who assume she's on their side. She's surrounded by people evaluating her reactions, waiting for a mistake, waiting for confirmation that she's crossed an invisible line. And Jo feels it. That awareness changes how she moves, how she speaks, how she listens. She becomes sharper, more contained, more dangerous, because someone who knows they're being watched learns how to weaponize silence. What's most unsettling is that Jo isn't trying to escape yet. She's staying, observing, enduring, and that suggests something far more intentional than burnout. The trailer breakdown hints that Jo is testing the system now just as much as it's testing her. She's letting orders play out, letting consequences land, letting the cracks widen. Not because she enjoys the damage, but because she wants to see the truth exposed in full. And when someone reaches that stage, they're no longer asking how to survive the system. They're asking whether it deserves to survive at all. So the real danger of Lioness's Season 3 isn't that Jo might fail a mission, it's that she might finally decide the mission itself is the problem. And once that thought fully settles in, how long before she stops reacting and starts acting on her own terms? By the time Lioness Season 3 really settles into its rhythm, it becomes clear that this isn't just Jo versus the system anymore. It's Jo versus the version of herself that survived by believing the system could be managed. The trailer breakdown strongly suggests that Season 3 is where that illusion finally dies. Not in one dramatic moment, but in pieces. Small realizations, quiet confirmations, the kind that don't shock you all at once, but slowly drain whatever hope you had left. Jo isn't discovering something new about the Lioness program. She's accepting something she's always known, but refused to name out loud. That the program doesn't exist to protect women, nations, or stability. It exists to absorb damage and move on. What makes this season feel heavier than anything before is that Joe can no longer hide behind success. Missions still work, targets are still neutralized, objectives are still checked off, but none of it feels like victory anymore. Every success just reinforces how disposable the people executing those missions truly are. And Joe understands that better than anyone. She's watched operators carry trauma while command carries credit. She's watched moral lines get redrawn after the fact to justify outcomes that never should have been acceptable. Season 3 doesn't let her compartmentalize that anymore. It forces her to sit with it. There's a strong sense that the show is deliberately stripping away Joe's emotional armor. The restraint that once made her effective is now isolating her. She can't lean on authority the way she used to, because that authority no longer feels legitimate. She can't lean on loyalty either, because loyalty in the system only flows upward. Downward, it's conditional, and sideways, it's fragile. Every relationship Joe has feels strained, not because of open conflict, but because of unspoken tension. Everyone knows something is wrong. No one wants to say it first. Season 3 appears to push Joe into situations where every option carries damage. Protect the operatives, and you undermine the mission. Protect the mission, and you destroy the operatives. Speak up, and you become a problem. Stay silent, and you become complicit. These aren't heroic dilemmas. They're exhausting ones. And exhaustion changes people. Joe isn't becoming reckless. She's becoming honest with herself in ways she's never allowed before. And honesty, in a system built on controlled narratives, is a threat. One of the most uncomfortable shifts hinted at in the trailer breakdown is how Joe's competence is now being reframed. What once made her indispensable is starting to make her dangerous. She remembers too much. She understands patterns too clearly. She knows how failures are buried and how responsibility is redirected. That kind of awareness isn't rewarded, it's monitored. Season 3 leans into that paranoia, that sense that Joe isn't just operating within the system anymore, she's being evaluated by it. Every reaction is data. Every decision is evidence. And Joe knows exactly what that means. The show also seems ready to confront the idea that leaving isn't a clean solution. Walking away doesn't free Joe from guilt. It doesn't erase what she's been part of. It doesn't protect the people she'd leave behind. But staying means accepting that nothing will fundamentally change, that the same patterns will repeat with new faces, that the damage will continue as long as people like her keep holding the line. Season 3 traps Joe in that moral limbo, and the longer she stays there, the more dangerous she becomes to the structure around her. There's an unmistakable sense that Joe is approaching a point where reaction won't be enough anymore. Observing won't be enough. Enduring won't be enough. The trailer hints at moments where she pauses just a second too long before responding, where she doesn't immediately correct a narrative she knows is false, where she lets consequences unfold without stepping in to soften the impact. And that's terrifying, because Joe has always been the one preventing disasters, not allowing them. If she's stepping back now, it's because she's questioning whether saving the system is worth the cost. Season 3 feels like it's building toward a version of Joe who no longer measures her actions by approval or survival. She's starting to measure them by truth. And truth doesn't care about rank, protocol, or optics. It only cares about what's real. That shift is subtle, but it's irreversible. Once someone stops prioritizing how things look and starts focusing on what they actually are, the rules stop working the same way. Joe knows that, and so does the system. The most unsettling part is that nothing about this feels rushed. The show isn't sprinting toward a collapse. It's walking there deliberately, letting tension rot instead of explode, letting Joe carry the weight until it bends her shape entirely. And when that breaking point finally arrives, it won't look like rebellion. It will look like clarity, the kind that terrifies institutions because it can't be negotiated with. So the real question Season 3 is quietly asking isn't whether Joe will betray the system. It's whether the system has already betrayed her beyond repair. And if so, what happens when she finally stops pretending otherwise? By the time Lioness Season 3 reaches its most critical stretch, it no longer feels like a story about missions at all. It feels like a slow, deliberate exposure of everything the show has been quietly circling since the beginning. The trailer breakdown and updates suggest that this season isn't interested in resolution or comfort. It's interested in reckoning. Joe is no longer framed as someone trying to hold chaos back. She's framed as someone realizing that chaos was always built into the system, carefully managed, strategically ignored, and passed off as necessity. That realization doesn't arrive with anger at first. It arrives with grief, the kind that settles deep, rewiring how you see every past decision. Jo starts looking backward, not to relive mistakes, but to recognize patterns she was trained not to question. Every mission that had to happen, every loss that was labeled unfortunate but acceptable, every promise that the next operation would be cleaner, smarter, more controlled. Season 3 makes it painfully clear that those promises were never meant to be kept. What's most dangerous about this phase of Jo's journey is that she's no longer fighting to preserve her place in the system. She's fighting to preserve her sense of self. And those two goals are no longer compatible. The updates hint that Jo is being offered quiet exits, subtle reassurances, half measures designed to pull her back into line without ever addressing the core problem. But Jo sees through it now. She understands that reform is just another way to delay accountability. That transparency is only tolerated until it becomes inconvenient. And that truth changes how she listens. Every conversation feels layered. Every directive feels like a test. And Jo isn't failing them. She's passing them in ways no one expects. Season 3 leans heavily into the idea that knowledge itself is a threat. Jo knows how operations are justified after they go wrong. She knows how narratives are shaped. She knows which truths are buried and which are polished for public consumption. That awareness isolates her further, because people who know too much are never allowed to exist comfortably. The system doesn't need to destroy them outright. It just needs to make them doubt themselves long enough to neutralize their impact. But that tactic only works on people who still want to belong. And Jo is drifting past that point. She isn't trying to be understood anymore. She's trying to be honest. The tension in Season 3 comes from watching Jo stand at the edge of something irreversible. She understands exactly what she could destabilize if she chose to stop protecting the machine. She understands the human cost on both sides of that decision. And that's what makes her terrifying. She isn't reckless. She isn't driven by ego or vengeance. She's driven by clarity, and clarity removes hesitation. The trailer breakdown suggests moments where Jo's restraint looks less like discipline and more like calculation. She isn't asking permission. She isn't seeking validation. She's weighing consequences with a precision that suggests she's already accepted the fallout. Another unsettling shift in Season 3 is how the show reframes silence. Silence used to be Jo's shield. Now it's her weapon. She doesn't argue. She doesn't protest loudly. She lets people reveal themselves. She lets decisions unfold without interference. And that passivity is more disruptive than open defiance ever could be. Because when someone like Jo stops correcting the system's worst instincts, those instincts become visible to everyone. And visibility is dangerous, not for her, but for the institution that depends on plausible deniability to survive. The updates also hint that the Lioness program itself is approaching a philosophical breaking point, not because of external pressure, but because of internal contradiction. The program depends on people like Jo to function, but it cannot tolerate what people like Jo eventually become: experienced, reflective, morally aware. That contradiction has been building since Season 1, and Season 3 finally forces it into the open. Jo isn't just questioning orders anymore, she's questioning the legitimacy of the structure giving them. And once that question is asked seriously, it can't be answered with rank or protocol. What makes this season especially heavy is the understanding that there is no victory condition left. Jo can't win in the traditional sense. There's no outcome where she saves everyone and walks away clean. Every path costs her something essential. Staying means becoming complicit in a system she now recognizes as fundamentally broken. Leaving means abandoning people who will continue to be consumed by it. Exposing the truth means becoming a target, not just professionally, but personally. Season 3 traps Jo in that impossible space and refuses to offer relief. It forces her and the audience to sit with the reality that sometimes there is no right choice, only the one you can live with. And that's where the suspense truly lives. Not in whether Jo survives physically, but in whether she survives morally. Whether she can make a choice that doesn't hollow her out completely. The trailer breakdown suggests that Season 3 is building toward a moment where Jo stops absorbing damage and starts redirecting it. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. Because when someone finally accepts that the system was never meant to be fixed, the only power left is the choice to stop sustaining it. Season 3 doesn't feel like the end of Jo's story. It feels like the moment her story changes shape entirely. And whatever decision she makes won't be loud, heroic, or cinematic. It will be quiet, precise, and devastating in ways the system never prepared for. Because when someone reaches the point where they value truth over survival, they become the one thing institutions fear the most. So the final question Lioness, Season 3, leaves hanging in the air isn't whether Jo will follow orders or break them. It's whether the system realizes too late that the most dangerous operative it ever created is the one who finally stopped believing in it.